The sky at that altitude felt thin and fragile, as if it could shatter at any moment. A pale, icy light stretched endlessly above the cloud tops, bleaching the world of color. Through the curved canopy of a German fighter, a lone pilot gazed downward, watching dark silhouettes struggle upward with painful slowness. Their wings looked too short, their fuselages too thick, their movements too heavy for the ruthless arena they were climbing toward.
Behind his oxygen mask came a faint, almost amused breath of laughter, a quiet disbelief. Nothing shaped like that, he thought, could possibly survive what waited above France. But war has a way of rewriting its own rules. What those pilots were witnessing that morning were not flawed machines clawing helplessly toward combat. They were watching the birth of a different idea of air power, a weapon conceived not to impress the eye, but to dominate the sky, a machine that would transform ridicule into fear and permanently tilt the balance of aerial warfare. The distance between what the eye could see and what history would remember was vast, wide enough to swallow an entire air force. And suspended in that frozen air was the question that would define the months ahead. What happens when a fighter that should never have worked becomes the one no enemy can escape? The answer begins long before those first encounters over France. In the summer of 1940, as Europe burned beneath the relentless advance of German air power, American planners studied the wreckage left behind. Nations had fallen not just to armies, but to control of the sky. From that devastation emerged a hard truth, as cold and unforgiving as the steel they were about to shape. If the next war was to be won, it would be won at altitude. German fighters ruled the upper air with precision and confidence. The United States needed something that could climb higher, strike harder, and survive punishment that destroyed lighter aircraft. When engineers at Republic Aviation received the Army's urgent specifications, they faced a challenge bordering on the impossible. Traditional fighter design worshipped lightness and agility, sleek frames, delicate wings, tight turning circles. But the threat looming over Europe demanded a different philosophy altogether. Alexander Kartveli, the Georgian-born designer leading the effort, made a decision that stunned even his own team. He would not chase elegance. He would not copy a Spitfire or refine a Messerschmitt. He would build something bigger, stronger, relentlessly powerful. The result, the XP-47B, did not glide into the air. It forced its way upward. A massive turbocharged engine filled the fuselage like a living heart of metal and fire. 8 heavy machine guns crowded its wings. Its silhouette looked awkward, even alarming. Test pilots approached it the way soldiers regard unfamiliar artillery, with caution and respect. Yet, when the throttle opened, the aircraft climbed as if it had discovered a hidden path through the sky. Progress, however, demanded a brutal price. Between late 1942 and early 1943, training units struggled to tame the machine. Ground loops struck without warning. Torque rolled the aircraft if mishandled. In dives, the controls sometimes stiffened until pilots feared they would never pull out. The numbers were unforgiving. Dozens of aircraft lost. Too many young airmen killed before ever seeing combat. The Thunderbolt seemed less like a promise and more like a danger turned inward. Still, the design resisted judgment by first impressions. Those who survived the early months discovered something extraordinary beneath its bulk, an engine that refused to die, and a frame that absorbed damage without surrender. When combat finally arrived in the spring of 1943, the Thunderbolt faced harsh realities. It could not outturn German fighters. It could not outclimb them at lower altitudes. Losses mounted. Victories were scarce. To the Luftwaffe, this confirmed everything they believed. The Americans had brought a mistake into European skies, a fighter too big, too slow, too heavy to matter. What they failed to notice was the shift already underway. The P-47 was surviving hits that would have torn German aircraft apart, and it carried firepower whose true consequences had yet to be revealed. The storm had not yet broken, but its shadow had crossed the horizon. The turning point did not arrive as a triumph, but as a survival that defied every rule of air combat. On a June morning in 1943, a formation of P-47s crossed the French coast when 16 FW-190s struck from the sun. Cannon fire stitched the sky. Within seconds, Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson found himself in a cockpit torn open by violence, canopy shattered, instruments failing, blood pooling beneath him. By every known law of aerial warfare, his flight should have ended there. Instead, the Thunderbolt endured, burning, shuddering, refusing to die. A lone FW-190 closed in and emptied its guns into Johnson's crippled aircraft. The German pilot expected debris. What he saw was something impossible, a machine that absorbed every shell and still clawed its way toward the channel. When Johnson landed in England, ground crews stopped counting holes after 200. In that wreckage lay undeniable proof. The Thunderbolt was not built to duel. It was built to survive, strike, and return. American pilots began to understand its logic. At altitude, German engines gasped for air. The P-47 did not. In a dive, nothing in Europe could follow it. The weight once mocked now transformed into devastating speed. Commanders reshaped doctrine. No turning fights, no drawn-out duels. Pilots climbed high, waited, and struck like falling steel. Boom and zoom. German pilots had another name for it, the moment the sky collapsed. 8.5 caliber machine guns converged their fire into a sphere of destruction. Anything caught within it did not fall, it disintegrated. By late summer, Luftwaffe reports changed tone. Pilots spoke of Thunderbolts diving faster than physics should allow, delivering fire so dense that survival depended on chance. The aircraft had not changed. The way it was used had. Altitude, once a German advantage, became a liability. At 28,000 feet and higher, German fighters struggled. Engines weakened, control stiffened. Time itself felt compressed. It was there that Hans Philipp, one of Germany's greatest aces, met the Thunderbolt on its terms. Experience could not overcome physics. A burst of American fire ended his career in seconds. For the Luftwaffe, certainty died with him. Investigations followed. Reports reached Göring's desk with unsettling clarity. The American fighter dominated at altitude, absorbed punishment beyond expectation, and delivered overwhelming firepower. The sky was no longer theirs. Then came evolution. Paddle blade propellers transformed the P-47's climb and acceleration. The Hunter could now rise as well as dive. Engagements once dictated by German pilots increasingly belonged to the Thunderbolt. By Normandy, the aircraft had found its final form, not only as a fighter, but as a battlefield weapon. On June 6, 1944, more than 500 Thunderbolts patrolled the invasion beaches. German aircraft found the sky layered with enemies. On the ground, soldiers learned to fear the sound of its dive. A single pass could erase convoys. Roads erupted. Columns vanished. The roar became a warning no one could outrun. By then, the Luftwaffe was no longer fighting for dominance. It was fighting to survive. The Thunderbolt represented more than engineering. It embodied a philosophy. War as an industrial system. Training, logistics, production, endurance. What Germany lost could not be replaced. What America lost returned the next day. By war's end, even German commanders admitted the truth. Skill and courage
could not defeat a nation capable of sustaining overwhelming air power.
When the skies finally fell silent, the Thunderbolt stood as more than metal and guns. It became a symbol of endurance, of a machine built not for elegance, but for survival. Once mocked, then feared, finally remembered. And in that journey lies its true legacy.
Traditional fighter design worshipped lightness and agility, sleek frames, delicate wings, tight turning circles. But the threat looming over Europe demanded a different philosophy altogether.